micro?
What do you know?
Up to date.
I'm somewhere about monopolies.
I just took the quiz on Monopoly.
I already paid for 60.
I made 2 mistakes, and I talked to some people in person. One was in one of the Perfect Market quizzes, there was a mistake about the shutdown rule, and I'll reference that briefly. And then on the actual quiz, which I have to hand back to you, the last problem was actually about the shutdown rule. And the quiz was only supposed to be on chapter 13. In the past, I've done it chapter 13 and 14, so Theory of the Firm and Perfect Market together. I thought I got everything off that was Perfect Market, but I didn't take that one off. That shouldn't have been on there. So what I did is I just gave everybody plus some points for that. And you're going to see the grade change, yeah. So I put the grade in, and then some people might have gotten like a 2 out of 5 on that problem, and I gave you a +3 because it shouldn't have been on there. But it's still good to have that question and talk about it. Good news for you. Let's talk about monopolies. Monopolies are a firm. Here's what happens in a firm. Firms have a slight decreasing marginal cost, which is when firms are efficient and become efficient because they maybe have some what's called returns to scale, where having an extra person, think the Starbucks baristas, the one person doing the cash register and the other person making the coffee, and then all of a sudden this starts to increase because adding another worker still costs $10, but they don't add as much. And that's the same marginal cost that you see all the time. And then monopolies, just like every firm, have an average total cost. The average total cost starts to decrease. How come? Well, one of the reasons is because the fixed cost, the average fixed cost decreases. Because, I like to think about the t-shirt making business. How much do we have to worry about how much we pay for like the stencil or whatever? Well, as more t-shirts that we make, the less the fixed cost matters. But in the long run, like the cost of making this next one is so expensive because we're taking the driveway and we're rototilling it to build more plants, or we're taking like rare ink that we can't really find because we need ink to make these t-shirts, and it's really expensive to get more ink in. I'm not sure how that would work, but the average total cost would increase. In a perfect market, that's what a firm sees, and then there's the market, and it's the old school supply-demand, and the price corresponds somewhere over here. If the price is up here, they're making some profit. If the price is down here, they're probably shutting down. How do we tell? I don't want to draw it up here right now. You can check the videos for it, but this is the answer or the reason for the 2 mistakes. There's average variable cost, which is how much if I'm making my lemonade stand, like I changed like 4 different businesses. My lemonade stand would be the lemon and the cups and the sugar and the water. That would be my variable cost. If the cost of making, the average variable cost of making a certain number of pieces is less than the price, I should still make those pieces. The best example is the t-shirt stuff. It cost me $1,000 to get the stencil, and then it cost me $2 to make every other t-shirt. So the average variable cost is only $2 to make each t-shirt. If I can get $3 for the t-shirt, I should make those t-shirts. I'm going to make some money off of some of those t-shirts. I'm not going to make that $1,000 back that I paid for the stencil, but I'm going to make some stuff back. So maybe I make $600 back, so I only lose $400. I'm producing at a loss. And I changed the question that was on the quiz to actually say that. I said, what would be the conditions that would make a firm in a perfect market produce but at a loss? And the price that they're able to sell something for would be higher than the average variable cost, but lower than their average total cost. That's the condition. That's the new question. It might be worth going back and checking that to make sure you have that. And when I hand you back your quizzes, to look through sort of the answer to that question. That question asks about the actual shutdown rule, and the company stops shutting down when the price is lower than their average variable cost. So if for making a t-shirt it costs $2 is my average variable cost of a certain quantity, I can sell the t-shirts for $1.50, I'm not gonna do that, because even though I'm not gonna make my money back for my fixed cost, I'm not gonna make my money back even on selling that one t-shirt. Pause and transit. A monopoly. Maybe in history, you talked about like the Sherman Antitrust Act or something. And maybe patents. And this came up briefly in a couple weeks ago's bioethics symposium when they looked at, well, who has a patent for a certain drug? There are a lot of different reasons that firms could be a monopoly. A monopoly is one firm. That one firm has full market power. They can decide what price to sell it for. They don't have to worry about other people. Imagine in the perfect market, the perfect competition, everyone's selling lettuce out of the back of their truck at a farmer's market. I roll in with some like super fruit that's got protein, it's got potassium, it's got everything you need, and it tastes awesome, and it's low calories and everything, but I'm the only one that sells it. I get to choose the price. Why don't I choose $1 million? Because no one's going to buy it for $1 million. I can choose the price, but people still buy it based on the demand curve. There's the demand curve. A monopoly has the same marginal cost and average total cost curves of any firm we've looked at. In a perfect market, the demand is actually seen only in the market and the price is decided and they're price takers. Here they're not price takers, they're price makers. They can choose what price. They're not going to actually choose what price, they're going to choose what quantity they want to produce at and then choose the price corresponding. Imagine you're the Phillies and you're like, ooh, I don't know, $1 dog night's kind of nice, but actually selling hot dogs for $4 is kind of nice. Well, I actually want to sell 50,000 hot dogs. What price should I set? And oh, the price is $3.50 or something. That, whatever from the demand curve. Great, for $1 you can sell a whole bunch. For $5 you don't sell very many, but for $3.50 you sell the amount you want. They see the entire demand curve. And they're price setters. Well, when they set the price, one of the assumptions that we set for all markets in economics is that there's one price. Imagine in Starbucks, you walk in and someone's like, you're dressed in a nice suit, you must make a lot of money, your latte is $12. And someone else comes in and they're like, you look like a starving artist, your latte is $1.50. Because they know that if they say, nope, it's $2 for a latte, that person's going to be like, no, I'm not doing it, I can't afford it. They're like, oh, you're a teacher, that looks nice, why don't you pay $3 for your latte? Right, like, okay, great. But that's not the case. They have to sell and put up there, okay, a latte, $4, that's the price. So the person who's willing to spend $12 is like, sweet, I get some consumer surplus. And the person that's only willing to spend $2 on it says, I'll have to find a substitute. Imagine that. I'm selling a rare t-shirt. Tim's willing to spend $100 on it. I could sell one rare t-shirt. I have like some of them, or a really nice t-shirt, whatever you want to call it, for $100. I'd be like, well, it's worth like $90 to me, so I'm not going to buy it for $100. But for $90, if I say the price is $90, now I have two buyers. Tim's pumped because he's willing to spend $100. He gets some consumer surplus. I sell two of them for $90 a piece is $180 total revenue. Price times quantity. You're just like, $90 is a lot for a t-shirt. It's really nice, but it's only worth like $80 to me. So $80 for t-shirts. Tim's like, I would have spent $100. Don't tell anybody. He's getting $20 of consumer surplus. I was getting $10. He was getting none, but she's purchasing it for $70. So I could sell 3 t-shirts for $70. I'm sort of coming up with the demand curve here, but $70 times 3 t-shirts is $210. That's more revenue than selling 2 of them for 80. No, 2 of them for 90, which is 180. Did I mess up the number somewhere? Close enough. At some point, all the way down the line, I could be like, hey, t-shirts are $20. And 20 people are willing to buy it. 20 times 20 is 400. That gives me that much revenue, right? And you can sort of see along the way, it's not that the revenue is going to necessarily increase, because imagine eventually I'm like, hey, free t-shirts, and $1 for a t-shirt, and 100 people are like, okay. I think that's how it would have worked out. I would have said, what, $10 would have been 10 people or something, and that's $100 of revenue. Well, why would I want 10? Great, I sold 10 t-shirts for $10. That's nice, but it's only $100 of revenue. But when I sold 3 t-shirts for $70, I got $210 of total revenue. $10, no, 100, 90, 80, 70 for 4 people is 280. I multiplied wrong, but you guys can pick me up on that. And so forth and so on. The big issue with monopolists is if they want to sell one more, what do they have to do? They have to lower the price. The problem is, you want to sell one more, great. You lower the price, okay, but you lower the price for everybody. This is the demand curve, that's where the price comes from. But the big issue is, where does the marginal revenue or revenue come from? Not necessarily AP Micro in the curriculum, but if you look at like, I don't know if I have a book here that's getting a 5 on the AP Micro from like Kaplan or something like that. They say, hey, the marginal revenue is twice as steep or has a half as much of an x-intercept as the demand curve. And they're like, so memorize that. Well, where the heck does it come from? Here's price. Revenue is price times quantity. This is just mx plus b, right, with a negative slope, demand curve. I'm going to substitute this in for p. If you take calculus, you need to watch the calculus video because I take the derivative of this thing, but not everybody needs to know what that is and how to do that. What you do need to know is that this is an upside down parabola, and if you set this equal to 0, the x-intercepts are 0 and, I don't know, m, q, and m over b or something like that. Upside down parabola. I sell very few things, but I sell them for a high price. Hey, look, I get $100 for my t-shirt. Aren't I cool? Great, but you're only making like $100. Well, when I sold it for $80, 8 times 3 was 24. That's why I get my numbers mixed up. $240 is more revenue. Well, at some point, it goes up, and it starts to go down. So here I'm selling very few things for a high amount of money. Here I'm selling very many things for a low amount of money. And somewhere in the middle, it's just right where it maximizes the revenue. For everybody that's not in calculus, I'm going to teach you some calculus. Calculus is about taking a curve and making it into little bitty slopes. Little bitty slope is pretty steep. Little bitty slope, less steep, almost flat. What are these little bitty slopes? This is a parabola, it doesn't have slopes, but the slope's pretty steep and becomes less steep. A slope of 0, and now these little bitty slopes become more and more negative. What's marginal revenue? It's the change in revenue for a change in quantity. These little slopes, change in y over change in x. Change in revenue divided by change in q. The slope is the marginal revenue. The marginal revenue is really high. The marginal revenue starts to decrease. The marginal revenue is 0, and then the marginal revenue is negative. you're in calculus, marginal revenue is the derivative of this. I can teach you about little bitty slopes. I can't teach you about the power rule. No, I can't. Not here, we don't have time to. I could. It's really easy. The mechanics of it are stupid. I shouldn't say that. The 2 comes in front and the exponent goes down by 1. It's a rule. It's like a cheat.
So that's DQ?
Say what?
That's derivative of
Yeah.
like Q, okay.
That's the only variable, really. I could have solved this and made it revenue as a function of price. You can take this as given. This is not in the AP Micro curriculum. What is in the AP Micro curriculum is that the slope of this thing is twice as much, -2 times m, and the slope of the demand curve is -m. Same y-intercept. So if it's twice as steep, it hits the x-intercept, or hits the x-axis halfway. Literally one of the test prep books says just memorize this. You should memorize this. This should be muscle memory, but you should sort of know why. For calculus, you definitely need to know that it's the derivative. For non-calculus, realize that it's these little bitty slopes that go up, flatten off, and then go down. The little changes. The changes are pretty big. The changes are not as much. The changes are 0. This plots out like the slopes.
So you want to sell when it's 0?
Not necessarily.
You get production cost.
So, what's our profit maximizing condition? We produce to maximize profits when the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Really, when marginal revenue is greater than or equal to marginal cost, so we all the way up until marginal revenue is marginal cost. Here's where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's the quantity that a monopoly produces at. That's how many the monopoly wants to produce. How do they figure out what the sell price is? They go to the demand curve. So here's this point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Go down to the x-axis. Okay, yep, that's the optimal quantity. Then go all the way back up to the demand curve. And here's the price that a monopoly charges. So you go down to here, and then all the way up and over. This is the quantity they want to produce such that their marginal revenue is equal to their marginal cost. In order to sell that many, they have to look at the demand curve and say, okay, well, if I want to sell this many, what price? If I charge a higher price, I'll sell less. If I charge a lower price, I'll sell more. I want to sell that many. That's the price that does it. Revenue is price times quantity. And the same thing as perfect market, this big rectangle is the revenue. Here's this quantity's average total cost. Average total cost times quantity is the total cost. Revenue minus cost and now you know how to do the first free response problem, which is worth 15 points on the AP exam. It's either this or perfect market. And the first part of it says, sketch profit maximizing monopoly. There it is. There's some other important points. Questions on this before I give you 2 other important points? Leland, you said, shouldn't we produce when marginal revenue is 0? When marginal revenue is zero, that means this little bitty slope is zero. That means you get the most revenue coming in. It's not necessarily the case. Oh, that's not necessarily the same thing as maximizing profit. Okay. If I did my equation right for Tim buying one shirt for $100, 50 and 50 I think is the right amount to sell, or 5 shirts for $50 is $250. I think that's the maximum. You can calculate exactly what it would have been. That might be the max, but it doesn't include my costs. If this was the last day of the season for the Phillies and all their hot dogs are going to go to waste, that quantity is how many they want to sell so that they bring in the most revenue, and that's the price they would want to sell it at. Remember with the perfect market, when we drew supply and demand. Market firm, the supply curve is the sum of all the other firms' marginal costs. A monopoly only has one firm, so the marginal cost is like the supply curve. This is the point when supply equals demand. It's not quite supply, but when it equals demand. This is called the social optimum. If I was the government and a firm had a monopoly, I would be interested in the social optimum. I would say, no, monopoly, you can't sell for this high price. You have to sell, at this price. But monopolies don't do that because monopolies don't care about the social optimum. Monopolies care about maximizing profit. So what do? They hold back production, they produce less than the social optimal, and they charge more. That's the case against giving medical patents or medicinal patents, whatever the word is. If you have a pill for curing anything, well, what is a monopolist going to do? They're not going to produce as much as the social optimum, and they're going to charge a higher price. The argument for patents is, well, the reason that you get this profit is the reason why companies do the research and put the effort in. If there's no profit, no one's going to do it. If you remember in a perfect market, there was some profit to be made. And then what happened is more firms came in the long run, and the profit got ground down to zero. That's not the case here. No other firms can come in. No other firms can enter. This is the price that I sell something for a profit maximizing monopoly. Here's how much someone's willing to pay. This is Tim being like, haha, I would have paid 100, but you're only charging 60. This difference is something that we know. There still exists a consumer surplus. There still exists a consumer surplus with a profit maximizing monopoly. Because remember, if I want to sell one more, it increases my revenue, but I have to sell all of them at that lower price. That's like the biggest thing out of this, like conceptually. Unless the monopoly is able to practice what's called price discrimination. discrimination is not like, you can't buy this because you're different. That's not price discrimination. Price discrimination is if I was able to say, hey Tim, it's worth this much to you, you're paying $100. Hey, it's worth this much to you, you're paying $90. Here's it's worth that much to you, you're paying $80. I'm pretty sure Amazon does this to me. I think I've mentioned this in here before with my Starbucks K-Cups. Sometimes they're $60, sometimes they're $70. Like, oh, he's addicted to them. Let's keep raising the price until he says, oh, for $85, I'll go find a different thing to have. Airlines do this. Oh, you're a last-minute flyer? You have a different price than someone else. Other examples, student pricing. Some magazines are like, hey, it's $15 if you're a student, but then it's $50 if you're not a student. That's price discrimination. Again, it's not like this loaded piece of like, oh, well, you can't buy this magazine because you don't belong as part of this community or whatever. It's not like that. It's that there's different prices, and that you can argue whether that's okay or not.
How is that legal? Isn't that-
Because it's a monopoly, you can do whatever he wants.
I think it's called combining Peter.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna send out, I think today, maybe tomorrow, a podcast that's for your listening pleasure. It's worth listening to because if you pursue, and I think I mentioned this in here before, but there's insurance premiums. If you and I have the same demographics, the same, like, there's not a history of cancer in our family, we don't smoke, we're the same age, we're not allowed to be charged different amounts for life insurance premiums. But some online retailers charge different amounts based on like how much you've searched around. You've done your research and they're gonna, okay, well, we'll go in at a lower price. Or, oh, this is the first place, maybe we'll just, raise the price by a couple bucks and they won't really realize it. And they'll, I think airlines do this too, but I don't know. And so anyway, the point is that two people that are exactly the same have different life insurance premiums and you can't do that, that's illegal. And I'm giving you the abbreviated version of this. And so a lawyer is bringing that to court and saying, you can't do that, you can't price discriminate. Groupon used to do this, I don't know how much they do it anymore. When Groupon first came out, the app would say, this is the price as long as 10,000 people buy this deal. Or 1,000 people buy this deal. So I might be an ice cream shop that's new and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have like better water ice than Rita's. But I need to get into the market here, so what am I gonna do? I'm gonna make a deal with Groupon, $1 for a large water ice, but it only works if 10,000 people all sign up. So now there's sort of a price discrimination from this like group of people that are willing to be like early triers of my ice cream or something like that. And there's plenty of room for research for you to do in college to figure out is it legal or is it not legal. I honestly don't know enough about law to know. I'm really just reciting in terms of the insurance thing what I heard on this podcast, which could be a bunch of baloney anyway. Who knows? You'll read somewhere about natural monopolies, so why does the government sometimes say it's okay for certain things to have a monopoly? Like SEPTA has a monopoly over public transportation in southeastern Pennsylvania. Okay or not okay? Well, the government decided, imagine if every railroad, a block up the road, there was another railroad. Because they're competing, perfect competition, everybody can, free to enter. They said, well, geez, here's what happens is, we'll give you this monopoly because we don't want to have tracks all over the place because there's no way they're sharing. But you have to keep prices down. And what they'll do is they'll set the price, like a price ceiling, and say, all right, here's the price, and they'll try to get it right at the social optimum. $2 for a ride on Broad Street line.
How would you quantify it, man? Like, make it a banker?
That's another great area of research for you to do in college. I don't know. I know that Google and Amazon mess around with their sites a lot, and that's part of the reason why Amazon maybe they price discriminate, maybe they don't. They change their prices to try to figure out, like, at least in the small area, what the demand curve might look like. So it's $60.50 this week. Next week it's $62. The week after it's whatever, and now they have 4 data points.
Yeah.
Quantity in a week, but I've mentioned before in here that demand curves probably look something like this, more like this, like asymptotic or whatever you want to call it. How come? Because someone's always going to be willing to pay a crud load of money for one, and there's really no, and like if the thing was free, everybody would take one. And so for like a cent, people are like, okay, I'm in, but for 2 cents, no way. It probably looks more like this. But in realistic terms, that's probably the only real part of the demand curve, and that's close enough to a line, so that's why we assume it that way. Because again, Amazon's not going to be like, well, this is Starbucks, 100 K-cups for $60. Let's put it on sale for $20 and see what the demand would be for it.
Yeah.
Like they're not gonna do that. They're gonna go, okay, well, here's 60, here's 62, here's 70. Ooh, that was a big decrease. It's gonna keep right in that range. And you could linearize that, like find an equation. You could take, so what eventually happens is in economics is you give this like a functional form and then start talking about its derivatives and some other pieces. That's it for monopoly stuff that I have. Oh, the pieces like I mentioned, SEPTA and then PICO is the same. Imagine that you have 3 different choices for electricity and you have all these different wires coming into your house or different gas lines coming into your house. The road would always be under construction. Those are called natural monopolies. And the government would try to regulate that in some sense. Natural monopolies occur when there's a huge fixed cost. How come there's no secondary professional football league in the United States? The fixed cost of having a football team is super duper high. You need a stadium and you need players and you need to advertise. So does the NFL have a monopoly? Yeah, and I know there's like antitrust stuff that exemptions I don't really know enough about to not steer you down the wrong path. Here's what I do know. This week, quiz on chapters 14 and 15. 10 multiple choice, 1 free response. Really trying to get you to have a gauge for next week's test. Next week's test is big. 30 questions, multiple choice. 2 free response. 1 you take here, and the other you take home. One's a monopoly, and one's a perfect market, perfect competition. You don't know which one's which. The one that you take home, you have to take as like a take-home test. Shouldn't take more than 20 or 30 minutes. It shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. You shouldn't be sitting there for an hour. But you should prep like beforehand. If you want to just get them all out of the way, Wednesday or Thursday of next week, more power to you. The test is only on chapter 15. If you look at some of the stuff online, at one point it was going to include monopolistic competition, which is when a firm has a monopoly but other firms can come in. So if you're Crest whitening toothpaste, you're the only toothpaste that has whitening in it. You have a monopoly over whitening toothpaste. But what happens, all of a sudden all the other competitors start to have, start to compete and give substitutes, etc. So now there's Aquafresh with whitening. That's called monopolistic competition. There's nothing against us starting a new cola company and competing with Pepsi and Coke. We could work on market share, and it might take a long time, but Coke has a monopoly over Coke. But we could sell RC Cola or whatever, something else that at least exists. And all that means is in the short run, they're a monopoly. In the long run, they're a perfect market. And we'll read chapter 16 actually over break. Then we come back, we'll talk about oligopolies, which is 2 or 3 firms. Imagine pizza places in a college town. You're going to sell a crud load of pizza. They're on opposite sides of the street. You're going to sell a crud load of pizza no matter what. Well, what happens? Should you get together and say like, hey, let's work together and we'll be a monopoly? That's called a cartel. Or are we going to compete? And you're going to sell $2.50 a slice, $2.25, and I'll make a big sign that says it. Oh, okay, $2. And now all of a sudden, we're competing and the price gets knocked all the way down. So some game theory comes in, and we'll talk about that in our meeting, first meeting after spring break. I wanna have one more meeting as a study session. I'm gonna give a practice, there's a practice free response for Monopoly and free response on this one, on this quiz. So we'll have two options. I'm hoping to do it Tuesday, but as you know, I'm not sure what days I'm gonna be in or not in. If I'm here on Friday, I might have a session on Friday, and if you can come, you can. I might do it during activity and during lunch. Just be heads up, and it would not be mandatory, but our next meeting is scheduled for next Wednesday, but that's when your test is. So I wanna have opportunities for you to meet beforehand. Also, I might try to do it electronically, like in Canvas, you can do conferences, and so at Domino sometime when everybody's free, we might do something, if I'm not here. And you can always email me questions, et cetera, as you go through. Yeah. So as of right now, I think somewhere I wrote that Tuesday, Z Block, we're gonna meet, and I know that you have a class during that. But it's not gonna be like a full time, it's gonna be just activity period. I have quizzes to give back to,